So at the end of the last video, we were talking about chemistry and energy and such. The book reminds us of two very important laws of the universe. The first and second laws of thermodynamics. What? Law of thermodynamics? Put simply, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. Okay, so energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. That's the law of the universe. The second law of thermodynamics, which is also called the law of entropy, states that with time, energy will always change from a more ordered state to a less ordered state. In other words, unless you have a counteracting amount of energy upon the energy, it will go to a less ordered state. Kind of like wood is a highly ordered state of energy storage, and ashes is a less stored energy form because it's released all that heat and all that order. Let me go back to my script so I don't mess this up. Yeah, that's about it. So as a side note, it's interesting that when humans burn sugars for energy, it requires oxygen. And when a piece of wood is releasing energy in the form of heat, it also requires oxygen. And both processes release carbon dioxide. So that's just interesting. Anyways, it's interesting. So as we talked about, nearly all of the energy that we are aware of comes from the sun. Plants use the sun's energy in photosynthesis to convert water and carbon into carbon dioxide, like sugars. These sugars could be leaves, fruit, wood. All of it is stored sun energy. Now, the energy of the sun is transformed from plants to other organisms when the plant, or a phytoplankton in the ocean, is eaten by an organism higher up in the food chain, like a fish or human. Cellular respiration is when the higher organism uses the stored energy for homeostasis or for growth. It's a lot. Read it slow in the chapter. Now on to ecosystems. Let's see how energy, matter, and nutrients move through ecosystems. An ecosystem is defined as all living and non-living things that occur in a particular place at a particular time and have interactions. Animals, plants, rocks, soil, sand, fish, fungi, bacteria, bugs. It can all be considered part of an essential ecosystem. An ecosystem can be as small as a puddle of water or as large as the Chesapeake Bay, for example. We'll learn about ecosystems and ecotomes in other chapters. Now, energy flows through ecosystems. From the sun to plants to insects like a grasshopper, to animals such as a bird that eats the grasshopper, to decomposers such as worms and bacteria that break down the bird when it dies. So the energy flowed in one direction only, from the sun, through the food web, back to the decomposers. But the nutrients are always cycled. All nutrients are cycled in the universe. Energy goes from one state of matter to another. Nutrients cycle around, and the chapter explains this. Now, the book skips very quickly to landscape ecology. I don't know why they did that, but landscape ecology is basically necessary when you're studying an animal that migrates through several different ecotomes or ecosystems to create its life cycle, like a bird migrating from a forest to a wetland to an estuary and back to the forest. Landscape ecology. Same with like elephants who are going across the different ecosystems of Africa. They're using several ecosystems, so you need landscape ecology to study how well everything's doing. The book also talks about ecological modeling, and how do I write it down? Ecological modeling describes when a scientist uses data from several different sources to predict outcomes, given different variables and scenarios. For example, an ecological model might use information on rainfall, temperature, and nutrients to predict how many insects will happen in that area next year. A model. Models always need to be refined, just like a weather model. You can take in all these variables and try to make a prediction, but you have to keep refining the model when you actually see the outcome, because models can be wrong. So what you do is you run a model hundreds or thousands of times, and you go with the most likely outcome for a rain event or number of insects in a forest. So in chapter 1, we mentioned ecosystem services. And table 2.1 in chapter 2 shows you several examples of ecosystem services, including erosion of rock into soil, the pollination of plants by bees, the production of animals by an ecosystem, etc. So check out that table. You don't have to memorize all of them. Just know what an ecosystem service is, know a couple examples. And again, it's something that exists with or without humans, but we benefit from it and in fact can't survive without it. So we don't want to ruin ecosystem services. Now on to nutrient cycles. The text describes in detail the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. You don't need to memorize all the parts of those cycles. There are 4 diagrams in there, 1 for each. But you should know that elements, molecules, nutrients, are cycled between the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the biosphere. Know those 4 terms. It's basically rock, air, water, and things that live with things that aren't alive. That's the biosphere. The water cycle is pretty well known, right? Ocean to clouds to rain or snow, then on to mountains, rivers, lakes, and finally back to the ocean, and sometimes into groundwater or aquifers. That's the water cycle. So the phosphorus, the nitrogen, and the carbon cycle are similar in the sense that they're cycled and recycled. Now, how does the water cycle get its energy? From the sun. I know I keep talking about that, but it's very interesting. You couldn't have a water cycle without the sun driving that cycle. So the carbon cycle, most carbon is stored in rock, some in fossil fuels, and some in the ocean, some in plants and trees, and some in mammals. We have carbon in us, and some is actually in the atmosphere. Now, when we burn the stored carbon that's in fossil fuels, we release that stored carbon into the atmosphere, and we increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon is known as a greenhouse gas, so it makes sense that if we release enough carbon, we're going to have an impact and have a higher greenhouse effect because sunlight energy is allowed in, but it doesn't escape back out to space. We'll talk about that later. There's a whole chapter on climate change alone. We can discuss, debate, throw out some ideas. Now, the nitrogen cycle, there's a ton of nitrogen in the atmosphere, but it is inert, which means it does not want to interact with other atoms or molecules. Now, unless it's fixed. How do you fix nitrogen? Well, when nitrogen is combined with hydrogen, it becomes ammonia or ammonium, and now it is available for plants and living matter. Okay, fixed nitrogen, tons of nitrogen in the air, but unless it's fixed, we can't use it. Okay, so nitrogen can be fixed naturally by lightning back in the day, or by bacteria in the soil. Weird still that denitrifying bacteria in the soil, denitrifying, drives the process in the other direction, and it actually converts the nitrates back into nitrogen gas. That's a whole cycle right there. So fixed nitrogen that's bioavailable, it used to be very limited until humans started using the energy of fossil fuels to fix nitrogen on an industrial scale for fertilizer. It's known as industrial nitrogen fixing. Now, fertilizers helped humans grow and survive and reproduce and create civilizations and write books and make computers and all these things that humans do. But we also are fixing twice as much nitrogen artificially as the Earth used to do in a regular cycle. So the excess nitrogen is impacting ecosystems. The Earth just wasn't ready to deal with all this nitrogen in such a short amount of time. So the Chesapeake Bay is a perfect example of that. Too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, the ecosystem changed, collapsed. Again, phosphorus is very similar to nitrogen. It was once a limited nutrient, and now humans make so much of it for fertilizer that it has the potential to impact or disrupt natural ecosystems and ecosystem services. The phosphorus cycle diagram shows that the vast majority of phosphorus is stored in rock and is released over long periods of time by erosion of soil into water, or carried by the ocean when it is used by phytoplankton, fish, and other organisms. And again, nutrients are cycled over and over. It could take 100 million years or it could take a few minutes, but nutrients cycle. Now, lastly, Chapter 2 provides us with an opportunity to reduce the impact of fertilizers on ecosystems, such as the Chesapeake Bay. We can, for example, reduce fertilizer use, plant vegetation buffers to capture nutrients, use wetlands to buffer the effects of nutrients on waterways. So check out figure 2.24 and see some of the solutions. Some are very easy and very inexpensive. Some are very difficult and very expensive. And we have choices as humans. You could do it the hard way or the easy way. We'll talk a lot about that this semester. We do have choices. So read Chapter 2 and see in this module the list of definitions or concepts that you need to know for this class. And I've used most of these definitions and concepts in this video. So it seems like a lot of information, but I'm basically compressing it all into a couple short videos using all the information that you need to know. It's in the book, so be sure to read the book, look at the list of definitions to know, and do the assignments, take the quiz. Let me know if you need any help. Wednesday night, office hours, 6 p.m., Zoom. That's all I got. I'll either see you Wednesday night or I'll see you online next Monday. Have a great week.